Hi guys, Ashley here. Today I'm bringing you one phenomenal guest. In fact, we have Kristina Koehler-Coluccia. Yes, I said that right. She's the head of business advisory in an established law firm in China, Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. Kristina, it's phenomenal to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. I follow you consistently on LinkedIn. You're the first thing that pops up in the morning. So it's wonderful to be on.
So this morning we are popping up on LinkedIn together.
Yes.
That's the way to start a day. Kristina, I would like to talk to you today about, setting up in China when it comes to company, when it comes to understanding taxes, when it comes to this new situation post-coronavirus. China is constantly changing. It's extremely dynamic. So let's start one by one. Let's start with the simple things. Companies in China do the introduction that we all need to essentially be aware of. How to set up business in China.
Well, I think first of all, right now with post-COVID, I don't even know if I should say post-COVID. In Europe, we're still in COVID. So I think, let me give you a little bit the sentiment that I'm feeling amongst a lot of foreign investors. And the sentiment is one of two things. Either one, they're saying, we really want to go to China. China is actually, up there in one of the global expansion opportunities. The issue right now is it can't be an opportunity. It can't be a priority. It's something where we need to take our time, and we're focusing first on our head office and I guess surviving in these COVID times. Yeah. And then you get the second ones or the second group where they're ready to go. And the issue for them is more, we're overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed and we can't fly over. So what do we do and how do we begin, right? And one of the things that I tell everyone to do is the first thing you have to do is have a network of people, not just me. I mean, you need a network of individuals who are going to help you with marketing, who's going to help you with e-commerce, if that's something you want to do, who's going to help you with distribution, logistics, warehouse, lawyer, accountant, HR professionals. I mean, it's not just one person that can help you go in. You need to have this ecosystem of people. And once you've got that network, and you start having these discussions, then it's easier to go into the market.
Amen.
After that, yeah, I mean, nobody can go it by themselves. It's impossible. And especially I think during COVID, you can't travel there. So you do need to have these outsourced providers that can start and can help you begin. And then the other thing that I tell companies is, have you done your research? I mean, quite frankly, there's no point in talking to me if you haven't done your research. I mean, if you don't have data points at your fingertips that you can say, I have a solid business plan and budget because I know how much money I can invest. I know what resources internally I can use as well as externally. And I know who my competitors are. I know the price points. Yeah. I know the platforms. I know if I want to retail or not retail. I mean, you have all of this data at your fingertips that can get you in. And this is the part where I'm amazed and people don't do it. Like, it's sort of this situation where they say, oh, it's too expensive. And what frustrates me a lot is that I love to refer my network. I love to refer people and help people to develop their own ecosystem and their own network. And I get replies back saying things like, oh, I've seen the website and they look really expensive. And I'm sort of at a stage like, have you picked up the phone to talk and understand what can they offer? I said, the phone call is already research for you. It's a free phone call that's research, right? And, and then you get the proposals. You can't base something on their social media platform, their website and how it looks and their content without speaking to them, knowing if they're the right fit, and then knowing what their proposals are looking like, right? And people are already stopping at the step of, oh, their website looks too glamorous. I can't call them, And I think it's a pity. It's really a pity. So I'm trying to boost this step. I really want people to get the research and get the data points. And something that I'm really trying to get people to realize is calculate the cost of a flight ticket to China, the hotel in China, the transportation in China versus having someone do it for you, right? And then weigh that proposal against those costs. You know, once a client has all of this at their fingertips and they say, right, Kristina, we're ready to go, then the big question is, do you need an entity or not? You know, I never want to force someone to set something up. They really need to know whether they're going to use that entity in China or not. Because actually, to then liquidate the company takes a good 18 months to 2 years. So you don't want to set up a company, never use it, and say, well, Kristina, you advised us to set it up. Well, no. Do you really need it? You know, are there solutions where you don't have to make that commitment and that investment? So that's
cross-border e-commerce being one, right? A lot of businesses participate in the China opportunity through cross-border e-commerce.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm saying nowadays is, look, you can't go to China right now. So why don't you do a test of the market through cross-border e-commerce, right? Do your marketing, do that first step. If the numbers look good, then set something up. You don't have to rush. You know, everyone thinks, oh, we should have been in China yesterday. I get it, but we don't need to rush into the whole setup. And usually when I say that, it calms people down because they realize, okay, well, actually, maybe we don't need an entity, and maybe we can find another solution around that. And then setting up the entity is really.
So in which cases, before we go into specific steps, so in which cases would you say it is not necessary to have an entity, and in which cases it is absolutely crucial to have a legal entity in mainland?
So I usually highlight a couple of trigger points. So the first two are the most common sense. It's what's the volume of your business and what's the value of your business in China. If both are at zero, well, let's first start using an intermediary before we go ahead and set up an entity. And obviously, if you then have a comparison over a few years of that growth, right, that volume increasing, the value increasing, that could be a very interesting first step to set up an entity. The next is, do you need a team on the ground, right? Now, I had a client, a consumer client. They started off with a distributor in China. And over time, the company realized, to maintain that relationship, we should have a foreigner on the ground who speaks Chinese who can maintain that relationship, right? And as this person was then, and they found a solution, which is a service we also offer, but a bunch of other companies do it, which is the incubation service. So you have an intermediary like us hire the individual, so that you don't have to set up your entity. And it's not just us. You could also ask your distributor to hire you. Right? There's ways of getting that around, but you're not committing to the market yet. And then slowly they discovered over time, the distributor is excellent at these 5 points, but is really bad at these 5 other points. So let's build a team where we do then this in-house, whether that be marketing, relationship maintenance, logistics, warehousing, it could be it depends on the distributor, depends on the relationship. So you start building a team. I mean, if you start getting to a team of 3-4 people, that's an operational office. I mean, that's already a trigger. We need to set up our own entity, right? But a lot of people start off in this middle ground. I don't know how to call it. It's this middle ground where you're using intermediaries. You've got your own team. You're figuring out the layout of the land, what your network is good at, what you can do better in-house, and then they start creating. And I love this methodology because you're taking your time. You're analyzing the market. You've got feet on the ground, and you're seeing how it goes. So it's a real step-by-step plan, actually. And you discover a lot of things along the way.
So perfect. Now we have a company that is ready to move into China, and they are planning to hire, let's say, 4 people in a specific location. Most of the people are right now pretty much set. They know that they want a WOFE, right? A wholly foreign-owned enterprise. They don't want a representative office. By the way, what is the difference, and why everybody goes for WOFE?
So I hate the term WOFE because it brings so much confusion. So a rep office, very simply, there's nothing you can do with it. It's a liaison office. Historically, it was used as a merchandising office for quality control and these types of things. And as China eventually developed, a lot of foreign investors used it as a type of operational structure, which is not allowed. And ultimately, I don't recommend rep offices. I mean, right now I'm recommending it to real estate companies who are marketing their overseas assets, right, to Chinese individuals. I mean, it's purely a marketing office, right? There's no revenue or funds going through it. The other alternative is a limited liability company. It's just a regular LTD. And that's what I want people to get in their minds. Get away from this WOFE, FICE, these type of terminologies that you'll find on Google, because ultimately you're setting up a limited liability company. You're liable up to the capital you invest. And what determines its activities is its business scope. So the business scope is going to identify what activities you're going to perform on the market, whether that's import, export, domestic sales, e-commerce, retail, service, licensing agreements, whatever it might be. And then obviously the product scope goes in there as well. So usually what I do, and what I, as just general tips, is I tell clients, get a piece of paper, bullet points. What do you want to do? And if you have that capability, say, what do you want to do in 2 years? What do you want to do in 5 years? What do you want to do in 10 years? And then we add on to it, right? And we try to make a nice, broad business scope. Another tip is that you can gain access to competitor information. So if you've got competitors in the market, you can actually grab their content from their business scope to analyze it. So it helps you as a...
That's a great tip, by the way. Very good tip. Very good tip. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're able to do a bit of benchmarking on your competitors in terms of what's in their business scope. Are they doing things that are outside of their scope, right? What's their capital investment? Who is the shareholder? So is it an overseas entity or is it a local individual? It just gives you that insider information on what how your competitors are structuring.
Are set up. Yeah,
exactly.
And when it comes to business scope, so a couple of people might be wondering right now, can you later on change it? For example, you were selling, I do not know, perfumes and some outfits, and right now suddenly you want to venture into snacks, or you were providing, I don't know, a marketing service, and suddenly you want to go into education.
Yep. So absolutely, you can absolutely update it. Just think, people say, oh, China's so complex. It's not complex, it's bureaucratic. So application procedures are tedious, and there's a lot of traditional paper that's involved. I mean, it's not all online. You have to print things out numerous times, and you just have to be patient with that application step. But absolutely, you can change your business scope. You can add to it. I mean, I've never had somebody want to take something out, but you can do that as well. But you can absolutely add to it. I mean, you have to know what the guidelines are. So for example, if you wanted to add food into your business scope, you will have to apply for a food and beverage license, which is separate. If you want to add retail into it, you will need a lease agreement of a retail store, right? So you'll have to know what are the consequences of adding something in, but absolutely you can do that.
And what about startup capital? So people are also quite afraid, I think, when you talk about, setting up entity. Many still feel that, oh my God, you need to invest many million US dollars. Right. And the reality is very different, I think.
Very different. So first of all, there's no minimums. which is amazing, right? So, you know, you can decide what your capital is going to be. When you apply for your company, you don't even have to show a business plan. So you don't even have to prove the capital that you need. But it's logical, you do need capital, right? So in China, your capital, your registered capital, that's the terminology, is going to actually flow into the bank account and be used to cover your expenses, right? So expenses would be rent, would be salaries, buying product, paying off your suppliers, etc. Right? It's capital that's not going to sit in an account and not be used. You're actually going to use it. So what's the tip? The tip is you got to create a budget. How much capital do you need? Right? And this is where, when I say these types of things, people get a bit stumped because it falls on their shoulders to do work, which is you've got to create a budget. And of course, I go back to the main point. How do you create a budget if you don't have data points from your research? You can't, right? How can you estimate revenue if you don't know what your competitors' revenue levels are? How can you estimate a price point if you don't know what your competitors' price points are? And then in terms of the expenses, I mean, you know, you go to Google and you type in salary guidelines China, and a bunch of HR professionals will have free salary guidelines available for you to make a salary budget, right?
Right.
What might not be included is social insurance, but you talk to somebody and you say, can you give me an estimate of what that would be? And you have your budget. Rent is the same. You contact a couple of real estate agents, you get proposals. I mean, there's a lot of homework, right? That you have to do, and it's all part of that research phase. But in terms of the capital, it's not something that you should feel overwhelmed by. It's capital you're going to use. You can always increase it, right? If you need more.
So why wouldn't company just register with, I don't know, 1,000 RMB? What is the trick there? Why would they go through this whole budgeting thing? Why wouldn't they say, you know what, this is my company and here's 1,000 RMB or 10,000 RMB?
Well, because the biggest downfall is cash flow, right? I mean, you can say, okay, I register 1,000 RMB, but you then put 1,000 RMB in the account. How far is that going to get you to start off your business? And then how are you going to pay off your expenses? From where are you going to pay off your expenses, right? Then it gets a bit complex and chaotic with the accounting and all of that. But you've got to have funds on the ground that can help you to facilitate payments. I mean, that's a trigger of why you would have an entity, right?
And it is very interesting because that leads us to the next question. The next step for many businesses, at least, they are setting up another entity, very often, let's say in Hong Kong or elsewhere, to be that holding company, mother company, or whatever company that is sponsoring, let's say, at least initially for the first period, this operation. So how does that work? I also believe that there's a lot of confusion when it comes to this whole offshore setting up Hong Kong companies. Tell me, let's destroy all those
myths. So that's old-fashioned now, because I think on a global scale, banks require you to be transparent and compliant. And ultimately, you cannot hide funds. And obviously, I'm now going to use a scary terminology. We cannot evade taxes. Taxes have to be paid somewhere. Banks are now becoming much more compliant in that regard because of a lot of case studies that have happened on a global scale. And there are strict requirements in terms of that. So ultimately, I actually, even though we do have a company in Hong Kong, I don't recommend Hong Kong as a holding anymore. If you are interested in Hong Kong as an operational structure, by all means, go ahead. But if it's purely a holding where it's a mailbox and the idea is actually that you're going to repatriate funds in there to hide it, that doesn't work anymore. You're going to get caught, right? So for companies that want to go into China, look at your double taxation agreement. If the taxes are correct and are optimized, you can do it from your home jurisdiction. And again, it depends on how complex your structure is at home, right? You might want to set up a separate entity just for your Asian business, right? That's not then with your, I don't know, UK, US, Canadian business, right? Or German business. So you've got to really, so first of all, you've got to talk to your tax advisors at home. What's good from that structural point of view, and then talk to someone on the China side, right? The two have to communicate to create a structure for you that is optimized, secure, but be prepared, taxes will be paid somewhere, right? At some point. There's no longer this thing of, tax evasion and hiding things and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, Hong Kong, Singapore, Cayman, Seychelles, British Virgin Islands, I mean, all of these things, be very careful if you're going there. And I think my biggest spiel, because now budgeting and saving money is so important. What's the point of having a Hong Kong company today that's purely a holding when you're only expecting to make profit in 10 years? That means Hong Kong will only become valuable in 10 years. Right? But then you're paying maintenance costs for this useless Hong Kong company for 10 years. I mean, that's cost that is going down the drain. Right? So it's all of this analysis that kind of has to go into what's the right structuring. And I hate to say just China, because China is one market. I mean, when you're looking at Asia as a whole, you've got to think of it from an
absolutely.
Asian
It's happening. Basically, it's a global thing, because right now, yes, China is important for lots of businesses, but at the end of the day, nobody wants to do business just in China. Even Chinese companies, right? You want to do business globally, and essentially that's where it's all going. Has anything changed that we need to know about in the past couple of months since the beginning of the pandemic, in this process up until the moment when you are actually holding your business registration number in your hand?
So to be honest with you, nothing's changed. I have had a couple of experiences now this year where, to be quite honest, the only change for us as a corporate service provider is that it's getting faster to incorporate. And that's a positive. So, in terms of incorporating an entity, it's not as complex as it used to be. I mean, I arrived in Shanghai in 2003. Trust me, back then, it took almost a year to incorporate a company.
Yeah.
Right? When I tell you that today it takes 3 months, that's a huge jump in 17 years in terms of improvements and whatnot. There's a lot of things for the application that can be done online, but this is not, this was before, but obviously with COVID, the online technology from the government offices increased because there was no other choice. They wouldn't allow you to visit the government offices in person. So hopefully that continues. But you still need to submit documents either by courier or in person, depending on the bureau. No, I think what's the biggest pain point is opening a bank account. Quite frankly.
Let's go into that. Where is the pain?
I mean, the length of time. So previously, in 2003, you could open an account like that, and the pain point was the actual incorporation. Today, the pain point is the opening of the bank account because of the KYC processes. The banks have to get to know you. They have to get to know your company, your background. They want to meet you. A new regulation that came out in August was that the banks are now required by the People's Bank of China to visit your office. So they want to verify that you have an actual office. And it's all a little bit of a contradiction because without a bank account, you might not necessarily be hiring people yet because you don't have money on the ground to pay salaries.
Right.
So what's the point
you
of
can't
going to an office with no staff?
Yeah, and not just that. Also, I think our listeners need to understand that you cannot even publish a job ad. You cannot even start hiring people if you don't have a legal entity. So basically, it's contradiction one on top of the other, right?
But the banks are now required to do these visits. So we have a client who's in So in Shanghai, there's a beautiful building called the Australia House. I'm not Australian, but I mention it because it's the developers, the Ankin Group, and they've got a fantastic relationship with this Chunding district government. And we have a client who's, you know, legally speaking, with a registered office address, which is also a pain point, you need to have a room with 4 walls. And this is the first time legally you can just have a work desk and register your office at that work desk. So that's a phenomenal development, and it's only in this building as far as I'm aware right now. And so, you know, what happened was my client worked with a bank. The bank visited the work desk, took photos, said he'd done it. The developer took the bank around to show the building, to show it was legitimate, and the account was then approved. I mean, for the bank, it's also not fun. I don't blame the banks, but you know, it's the higher ups that are pushing this, and the banks are just required. They're required to take photos, and they're required to physically visit. So,
and if the entity is set up by let's say foreigner that is residing outside of mainland China, do we understand correctly that that foreigner, even during COVID-19, needs to be physically present at the bank account opening procedure?
No. I mean, with COVID, the banks realize Zoom calls, so they do Zoom video conference calls, or alternatively, they ask the legal rep, the appointed legal rep, to take a video. So you take a video of yourself. We prepare a text for you to read. You have to hold your phone in one hand, your passport in the other hand, and then you've got to read a text saying, yes, I am Kristina Koehler-Coluccia, born on XYZ date. My passport matches my face. And yes, I confirm the opening of the account, right?
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yes. So, you know, it's one of those things where the banks have been able, through the higher ups, to adapt, where, you know, the banks don't have to see the original legal rep passport, and you can do a lot of things over Zoom calls, and then just making videos yourself to send it through. Yeah.
This is perfect. Another
hopefully it continues. Hopefully it continues. We never know post-COVID, but hopefully.
I think it must. I think it must. Moving on to the next step in this setting up in China journey would be hiring your staff. So what are the necessary people that companies need to hire? You just now have mentioned the legal rep. You know, where do we look for them? How do we set this up? Are there any things that we need to know? You've also mentioned that there's a certain social component that we need to pay, that we need to be aware of. So what is your advice on that step?
So I think in regards to hiring people, there's 2 sides to it. So one is when you set up your company, you need to have a corporate structure. So you've got a shareholder, you can decide if you want a board of directors or an executive director, you'll have a legal rep, you'll have a general manager, and then you'll also have a supervisor. These are all roles that need to be appointed. None of those individuals have to reside in China. So you can use your own structure at home to appoint those individuals. There's a lot of complexity in terms of who you're choosing, and the conversations that I have with companies is that people are scared to be in those roles, to then find, you know, everybody's heard the stories in the media. Oh, you know, I got stopped at immigration because I am the executive director or the chairman of the board or the legal rep, and I didn't do XYZ, and now they're kicking me out of the country. Or there was some form of criminal activity and the legal rep is the first person that is approached. And so there's a certain level of fear to hold any of those roles. I've been in those roles for 17 years. There's no fear. I mean, you know, ultimately you need to have internal guidelines and internal compliance procedures to say a legal rep is allowed to do XYZ, and this is his responsibility. Or a board of directors or an executive director has this responsibility. And usually when you set up a company, you've got an articles of association or a company bylaws document that outlines these responsibilities. So it's very clear then for the person who's in that role to know, okay, this is my job, right, with this China entity. fear should only come if there is bad intention with that company, right? If you're planning on doing some form of criminal activity, whether that's getting kickbacks, whether that's whatever it might be, well, then yes, just like anywhere else in the world, you would be at risk, right? So, I mean, compliance procedures and corporate governance are critical in any company. And then it comes down to hiring the people. And that's never easy because obviously the biggest, I guess, perception is, well, there's such high turnover in China. Who cares who we hire? We'll just hire because we need to hire someone. And I think I use a personal experience. I think for me, my biggest mistake was, especially in my startup phase, I never wanted to rock the boat. I didn't want to fire people. I was scared to lose people, not find people to replace, and then not have enough staff on hand to handle the projects and the clients, right? And obviously when you're in the service industry, turnover of staff never looks good, right? So you are scared of this, and then you don't want to rock the boat, but you know you don't have the right people in your team, and you're stuck, right? It's a completely vicious circle, right? So what's the key to hiring people? I think the key is, to find people, there's a lot of avenues. So one is WeChat through your own network, highlighting, I'm looking for someone, using LinkedIn, because there's a lot of Chinese people also on LinkedIn. And then obviously you've got these online job sites like 51job.com, China HR. I mean, there's a whole bunch of others. But to work with those companies, you need a business license. Right. And then naturally you've got the headhunters, right? That can also help you. I think in terms of the interviews, be prepared for cultural differences. Right? I mean, I remember interviewing people where accountants would come in very shy, never take their jackets off, and their handbags they'd be hugging their handbags because you could feel the tension that they had and the nervousness. You got to let people relax, and it has to come from you. The biggest thing I've learned in China, and obviously I think with the millennials, this is definitely changing, but in the past it was a lot of Chinese, their culture is that they are reactive individuals. So they wait for you to give them direction, right? And you've got to encourage that proactiveness. Yeah. Right? And the minute you encourage that proactiveness, I mean, it's amazing. Because probably for a lot of them, especially the older generation, it'll be the first time they're thinking outside of the box, which they might not be used to doing. So, you've got to encourage that proactiveness, encourage that communication is so vital, vital. One of the biggest things that I see is, yes, you're sitting abroad, your team is in China, and you don't bother to communicate with them on a daily basis, right? And during COVID, February, end of January, February, and early March, my clients were lost in terms of how to communicate. What do we ask them? What do we say to them? I said, well, why don't you start off with, how are you? Are you okay? Is your family okay? Right? Start with that process and talk to them. Feel like they belong and they're part of your company community. They're so far away. And maybe they're not even able to travel to understand your company culture, right? And especially now they aren't. So you've got to somehow bring it to them through Zoom calls, through that level of communication. And then vet them. I mean, vet them. My especially for the seniors, right? I mean, my
How do you vet them? How do you vet them?
Well, you can always do a due diligence. So you can get a background check done on them. You can contact references, right? Call references. That's not always reliable either. But I think ultimately for me, I always give a test, especially for the seniors, where I tell them, look, if I'm going to hire you, you're in a senior role. What is your action plan in the first 3 to 6 months on the job? Can you create a PowerPoint presentation and present to me what you would do? So first of all, you can see how good are they in PowerPoint, because if you're a PowerPoint organization, that might be important. The second thing is you might then find out they have to be proactive with ideas. Do they have ideas, right? And then something that I do in the presentation that kind of then tricks them a little bit is I say to them, what do you need from me? In order to execute this, what do you need from me or my management team to give you the tools to execute your action plan? And just with that piece of work, you can see how serious they are, what ideas do they have, does it match your values? It's just a test, right? You don't do it with everyone, but maybe the top 3, top 5 candidates.
Absolutely. For us, we are in creative industry and we do that with everyone. Slightly different task, but we actually invite people for the trial day. So they come in, before they come in for the interview, they have a task that they do at home. And then we invite people to come for the trial day, to actually experience the culture, to actually stay here for the day and then do the stuff that they are most likely going to be doing if they are design stuff, if they are, I don't know, writing articles, etc. So that is also, it's a very complicated hiring process. But
do you feel, are you not worried that they might take information away from you?
We are signing, obviously, the paperwork, the confidentiality agreements, etc. It's just one day, so nobody asks them to go and work on a major, let's say, project. But yeah. But it is an opportunity to. I mean, it's a bit like getting married, right? At the end of the day, you don't grab the first person on the street and say, "Okay, let's do this together," right? You get to know each other, and what better way to get to know each other to actually experience it, not only on the phone or face to face in 20 minutes, but in this kind of immersive one-day trial. Yeah. So, but these are already great tips. Well, we've been doing that for the past 8 years. It works. We have done it with like all staff since the beginning. It is working. Obviously, it's not 100% hit rate, but it's much higher than the industry standard, which is showing that probably there is some value in that. Okay, what about the payment? Their salary in China is also structured slightly differently. Let's say here in Europe, we have also social component. In the US, we just pay a chunk. In China, it's structured very differently because a big component is going into all these different insurances. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, so you have a gross salary amount, and from that gross salary amount, you have social insurance and housing fund contributions. So social insurance encompasses everything from the pension to medical insurance, accidental insurance, maternity insurance, which even men get. And I feel like I'm missing one. And then you have housing fund. And every city has different rates. Because it is based on the standard of living of a city. Shanghai has the highest. Following
and what is the percentage?
Oh my God, that's a very good question. I would say currently it's about 55 to 60%, but then capped. At a certain level. So if you go over that level, you're staying at the capped amount, right? And every city is very different in terms of the rates. Obviously, tier 1 cities will be more expensive, tier 2 less, tier 3 even more or less, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where when you budget, you've got to know what the social insurance component is, because it can really affect your budget if you haven't added it in. And you pay that on a monthly basis. So it's a monthly component.
So if the person, in simple terms, if the person is seeing online advertising for a job, let's say 10,000 RMB, then this person is expecting to be getting 10,000 RMB. And on top of 10,000 RMB, you've got around, let's say, 50% the social security amount. So you are actually giving out every month, not 10, but 15,000.
Correct.
And in your budget, guys, and breaking
Yes.
it down for you very clearly. In your budget, you don't put 10,000 RMB, you're actually putting 15K.
15, correct.
Yes, because
Absolutely.
this is what you are giving out every single month, not end of the
Exactly.
year, not after the probation period, but every single month from day one. Phenomenal.
Exactly.
And right now,
but don't forget also, just as a tip when you're negotiating, make sure it's clear when you're discussing with these candidates. Is the candidate talking net or gross?
Which one are they usually talking?
It varies. I mean, it really, really varies. It really comes down to the candidate. But the reason why I say that is so vital is because the employees also pay social insurance. And then they pay tax, which also then comes out, right? So they might be getting a gross of 10 and in the end actually only getting 8 in their pocket. So you've got to know how that discussion is going and what is gross and what is net. Make sure you're very clear and transparent in terms of the terminology.
Absolutely. This is a great tip. And right now you've mentioned that depending on the city, a lot of things differ. And I think one topic we have not covered today yet is, of course, these special economic zones and the way to set up there. There's been so much buzz about, oh my goodness, you can set up the company in 3 days and open an bank account in 24 hours. If you go to XYZ special administrative zone, tons of them are next to Shanghai, tons of them are in Shenzhen and all across China. What is going on with those zones?
So I think it's so funny that you talk about it, because I was just talking to somebody yesterday about how they were approached by a zone in Tianjin. And he gave me a Word document with the policy guidelines, these beneficial policies that were being offered. And I'll name a couple that for me were red flags. So one of the policies was very generic. You will get tax preferential deals with profits tax, and they gave a whole list of the taxes, but they gave no rates. So how do you actually know what's preferential, right? How do you even know to go there? I mean, it was something that was obviously very obvious for me, but as a newcomer, just reading the statement, you get preferential policies, you have to go in the details. What are they, right? What is being provided? What are the criteria? And if you don't fit that criteria, do you still get it or not, right? Another was, we'll do the incorporation for you. Which actually ultimately meant they will submit, but they won't do any of the other follow-up steps. And there was a sentence in there saying, we will choose an agent for you that you can sign a contract with. You should be able to choose who you want to work with. I mean, it's a free country. The zone should not make that decision for you. You can work with whomever you like, as long as you like them and you agree with their fees. But one big tip that I will offer is, when you go with local agents, and I'm using this as, again, very generic, it can be any agents, be prepared that a lot of them don't give the advisory. They are turning around reports. They are physically doing a job, but there is none of this additional aid and advisory to help you grow your business, right? There's no feedback. It's a very reactive service, right?
Once we're talking about the services, how much does it actually cost? You know, some people are obviously trying to save every single penny, and they think that the zones are going to provide them a service, and this doesn't always work. Others are going with very frugal providers that are, exactly. And others are want to go with, with professionals that provide this level of advisory. So what would be your classification here?
I can tell you it ranges from free of charge with these promotional bureaus in the zones, all the way. I think the highest that I've ever seen is a cost of 118,000 for an incorporation. Yeah. And then you really have everything in between. Look, my biggest tip is, and I think this is actually the problem in China, is that from a legal perspective and even from an accounting and tax perspective, the laws are not black and white as they are in the Western world. So there is room for interpretation. And because of this room for interpretation, any advisor will give you probably a different opinion based on their experiences, what they've been able to get away with, what they haven't been able to get away with. So you've got to shop. You've got to talk to a variety of people, and again, find the right advisor that fits you. But one component you should not underestimate is you need help. So get a firm that gives you advisory. Okay, you can't do it alone. Don't make the assumption you can read a management report and you know what it's all about. You need someone to help you to analyze that, who's proactive with you, to sit down and say, you know, revenue doesn't include VAT in China. VAT is in the balance sheet. Or, you know, simple things like this that help you to be able to read. And China is fast paced, right? So whatever activity you're doing, you've got to be able, and COVID really taught me this, is you've got to be able to pivot your business fast. So you've got to be able to make decisions very, very quickly. How are you going to make those decisions? By analyzing the data from your business, right? So sales, particularly. If you're on e-commerce, you're going to get data from the platforms that you've got to analyze. Don't sit back. You've got to read them and know what they mean. And then you've got to look at your financial management reports, your P&L, and your balance sheet, your cash flow statement. Nobody likes to do that, right? When you're a CEO or executive director, that's probably the last thing. You just want to look at the final number. Is the final number okay? But you've got to look at the details so that you can make decisions and either pivot, go in the same direction, step back, you know, make changes, things like that.
Does it make sense? And right now you've mentioned that advisory is very important. So does it make sense to have the advisor in your city? Because a lot of people are, well, at least that I know, are going on with this one virtual company that, let's say, sits in Nanjing, and then they're setting up a company in, let's say, Shenzhen. And obviously they are not on the ground. And as you've mentioned previously, a lot of things in Nanjing are different from the things in Shenzhen. Right. And it might not be a big problem right away, but long term it might be difficult. What's your advice here?
Look, I only have an office in Shanghai. So I have my team in Shanghai. I have no intention of expanding to other cities. I'm trying to keep a very, concise structure to make it easy to manage. However, the majority of my clients are not sitting in Shanghai.
That's right. Okay, so it is possible, by sitting in Shanghai, it is possible to help somebody in Shenzhen open a constructive office, bank account, blah, blah, blah. And support them, right?
And just to emphasize, I would say close to 80% of all law firms are headquartered in Shanghai, right? And then they have satellite offices, but not in every city in China. So even if you have a lawyer or an auditor, it might not be that they are anyway in the city or village that you're incorporating in, right? But, you know, there's WeChat, there's WeChat video. And don't forget, all of us, again, I'm generalizing here, but my assumption is that all law firms, accounting firms, and service providers will have their network of people on the ground. So for example, for us, we have a network of auditors or tax officers where if we're not on the ground, we have their assistance to complete whatever compliance procedures have to be completed. So that aids in not being there. And post-COVID now, everyone is traveling anyhow. So that's not really an issue. I mean, trains are running, flights are going. So it's not a huge dilemma. It is all possible. Yeah,
absolutely.
The only thing I want to highlight on that point though, Ashley, is because I see this a lot with clients, is that when you have a registered office address, they choose that as a location, and then they're operational in another city. And that's a no-no.
Okay.
So that's actually illegal in China. So if you choose a registered office address, you've got to be operational in that location.
Very good point. Kristina, it was one phenomenal chat. We've all learned a lot about setting up in China and really getting ready for this opportunity. And right now, it might feel like not the best time, but actually, as I always love to say, China will never be cheaper and easier to enter than right now. It will only get more complex and most likely more and more expensive. Do you agree?
I can only vouch for Shanghai. So for Shanghai, it's definitely getting more expensive. I'm originally from Hong Kong, and quite frankly, it's getting on par with Hong Kong, quite honestly. So yeah, I mean, it is getting more expensive. I find that things are getting easier, but that again could be 17 years of being there, that it's getting easier. But you know, it just shows that after a certain period of time of being there, you kind of get used to the dynamic, and you get used to how things work, and what needs to get done. So
absolutely. And I honestly also believe that it does get easier. It has become easier. I also moved to mainland when I was 17. It was back in 2005, 2006. And things, as you were saying, in 2003 were difficult and they were different. Yeah. Right now, we are just at a different level. Thank you so much again, Kristina. Guys, do connect with Kristina on LinkedIn. And if you are setting up a legal entity and looking for advisory for professional firm to handle that for you, she is the girl. She is your person.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks very, very much. And guys, stay tuned for more China experts to come.